The squeals of the banks confirm Senator CANAVAN'S recommendations are on the money. Finally, a parliamentary inquiry has called out the major banks' appalling mistreatment of customers and communities, backing it up with powerful recommendations to bring them into line. This is the Australian Citizens Party's view of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Committee's 15-month inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia, instigated by Senator Gerard Rennick and chaired by Senator Matt Canavan, which handed down a comprehensive 199-page report on Friday. The Citizens Party helped to lobby for this inquiry and participated in all 13 public hearings held around Australia, at which communities were able to present their experiences that proved the banks lied when they claimed customers didn't want to use banks anymore. In a March 2022 release, the Citizens Party called for the inquiry's final report and recommendations to match the power of the hearings. Citizens Party Research Director Robert Barwick said today that the senators have done justice to the testimony of communities like Junee, Carnama and Tom Price. They've acted on what they've heard and squared up to the major banks with recommendations that, if implemented, will improve Australia's banking system with minimum standards of conduct and service. The final report has made 8 recommendations, of which the Citizens Party considers 3 to be game changers for Australia's banking system. Number 1, essential services. The committee recommends that access to financial services should be designated an essential service, specifying there must be a guarantee of reasonable access to cash and financial services for all Australians. These are not just words. Being an essential service imposes legal obligations on banks that don't exist presently. And it's the bank's own fault. During COVID, they lobbied successfully to be considered an essential service to avoid lockdowns, but then withdrew that essential service from hundreds of towns around Australia through these branch closures. The committee has called them out on it. Number 2, mandatory code of conduct, meaning no more self-regulation. The committee calls for the government to urgently develop a mandatory banking code, which requires proper consultation with communities before any branches are closed and requires the regulator to assess compliance with the code and approve any closures. This recommendation is a tribute to the late Labor Senator Linda White in her participation in this inquiry before her tragic passing earlier this year. Senator White exposed the bank's code of conduct being essentially voluntary as a joke and locked horns with Australian Banking Association CEO Anna Bligh over it. This was past due. The banks shouldn't be a law unto themselves. And number 3, a public bank. In the Citizens Party view, the public bank, listed as recommendation 2 in the report, is the most significant recommendation. It states, the committee recommends that the Australian Government commission an expert panel to investigate the feasibility of establishing a publicly owned bank. In investigating this, the panel should examine options including, but not limited to, a standalone public bank or one associated with and using the branch network of Australia Post. The Citizens Party's Robert Barwick and Glenn Isherwood testified on a public post office People's Bank solution to the December hearing of the committee, as did Emma Dawson from independent think tank Per Capita and Angela Cramp and Scott Etherington from the Licensed Post Office Group. This is the bank's worst nightmare. competing with a public bank on service. It's the big game changer and the one that the banks are attacking most. They won't be able to throw an army of lawyers at finding loopholes, but will actually have to lift their game. The Citizens Party called for the recommendations of the committee to be implemented in full. You should take this opportunity now to email and call your members and senators to demand that they support these recommendations also.